Hi and welcome to Greece Travel Guide. If you're planning on using ferries for an upcoming trip to Greece but aren't sure where to start, I'm going to explain exactly how the Greek ferry system works and hopefully answer any questions that you might have. You'll find chapter markers in the description below if you're looking for specific information, and if you do find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you're interested in more content on Greece and the Greek islands. Let's start with the most important question. What is the Greek ferry system like? Is it something that you should be excited about using, or is it best avoided? So our first experience of the Greek ferry system was back in 2017. We'd planned an island hopping adventure involving 9 different Greek islands. We pre-booked all of our accommodation, done a bit of research to make sure that we could get from each island by ferry, but what we hadn't done is booked any of the ferry tickets in advance, and we'd never travelled by ferry before. So it was a little bit stressful, kind of hoping that we could find the right ticket offices, buy the tickets, turn up at the port, and be able to get on the right ferry. But I'm pleased to say that 8 years later and about 50 ferry journeys under our belt, it's actually really not that difficult. What I'm going to do in the rest of this video is just explain the whole process of finding ferry tickets online, booking online, or whether you should wait until you're on the islands to book. The whole process of boarding the ferry, what the ferry journeys are like, how reliable the service is, and things like that. So the first question you might have is, how do I figure out whether I can get from one island to the other island by ferry? And there's a couple of ways that you can approach this. Firstly, you could look at individual ferry companies' websites. They're going to have like the most accurate schedules, and they would be companies like SeaJets, Golden Star, Blue Star Ferries, and so on. And they all have websites where you can go on, you can search for tickets and book directly with them if you want to. Now, the main issue with this approach, of course, is that if you don't know what ferry companies run routes between the islands that you're looking to travel on, then you're not going to know to go to their websites and you're going to be a bit stuck. So the approach I like to take is to use a third-party service, and the one I recommend most is Ferry Hopper. There are several others, I'll put a link in the description below. But Ferry Hopper is a really good website, and what you can do is you just put your starting and destination islands in, and the date you want to travel, hit search, and it will come up with the results of the ferry companies that will run that route. And one thing to say about that is that ferry companies don't always publish their schedules that far in advance. It can be as little as 3 months ahead of time. So if you're planning a trip for next year or even in 6 months' time, and you use websites, whether it's Ferry Hopper or another website, you may find that you're not getting the full set of results. And in that case, all you can really do is wait until closer to the time and then keep searching. Usually within 3 months of the date of travel, then the results you get will be a full reflection of the services that are available. And one thing you can do if you're anxious to make sure that there will be ferry connections is use a website called openseas.gr. And again, I'll put a link in the description below. Now, what this website does that a lot of other websites don't is allow you to search back in time so that you can actually look at what the schedule was in the previous year for any given date, and it will show you all of the ferries that ran between your start and end destination on that day. And obviously with this, you need to be careful to pick the right day of the week and not the same calendar date, because ferries run to a weekly schedule. So if you're looking to travel, for example, on the second Wednesday in September, then make sure if you look back on the previous year, you're looking at that same second Wednesday and not the specific day in the current year that you're looking to travel. Otherwise, the results aren't going to be the same. But what that will do is it will give you some idea of the ferries that are likely to be running. They do change from year to year, but usually not that much. So it will give you some indication of what ferry services are likely to be available on the day that you want to travel. Now, with that in mind, what we recommend is always booking accommodation with cancellation. And that way, even if you're planning your trip, 6-12 months in advance, as it gets closer to your travel date, you can keep checking the ferry sites, Ferry Hopper or whichever one you want to use. And if you do find that the ferries that you're expecting to be available aren't available, then you can go back and replan your itinerary, cancel the hotels if they've got free cancellation, and make alternative arrangements. So having found the ferry routes that you want to travel on, the next question is whether you would book those tickets online or whether you wait and buy them in person once you're on the island. Now, people have different approaches to this, and historically it used to be much, much better to wait and buy your tickets when you're on the island. And the reason for that is you had to get a paper ticket printed before you could board the ferry. Now, one of the positives to come out of the COVID-19 pandemic was the increased adoption of e-tickets by most ferry companies. I think if not all of them now support e-tickets. And that means that you can book online and then you'll get an email confirmation with a QR code that you can either print out yourself or just have it on your phone, and you can board the ferry with that QR code. So for me, I find the convenience of booking my ticket online just much easier than buying them when I'm on the island. Depends on the time of season that you're traveling as well as to whether it's really useful to book online or whether you can actually wait and buy the tickets in person. So there's an amount of personal preference here. If you are sort of island hopping, you've got the itinerary planned, then what I tend to recommend is wait until a few days before you're going to travel. And then, once your itinerary is locked down, you've got your accommodation booked, what days you want to travel on, then go online and book those ferry tickets. It's unusual for ferries to get fully booked, but increasingly Greece is a popular place to travel, particularly in the summer from July through to September. And the popular islands such as Mykonos, Santorini, Paros, Milos, some of those routes are incredibly popular throughout the summer. The issue if you don't book in advance is obviously the risk that those ferries might be full. Now, more often than not, between those islands, there's more than one ferry a day. So it may be the case that the preferred one you want to travel on is fully booked, but there's other services available. But it is a risk, and it does mean that then you may not be able to travel at the time of day that you want to travel. So all around, I think it's just less stressful to wait a few days before you travel and then buy your ferry ticket online, and then you've got it on your phone and you don't have to worry about it. So having bought your ferry ticket either in person or booked online, the next question is, what is the process of actually getting to the port and then boarding the ferry? Now, this is quite straightforward and it doesn't really need to be that stressful. It's much easier than traveling by plane, for example. You don't have to arrive at the port at a particular time earlier than your ferry departure. You just have to be able to sort of set foot on the boat before it leaves. Now, a word of caution on that the Greek ferries are surprisingly efficient, and as soon as they've unloaded passengers and loaded passengers, they will just leave. So it is worth getting there sort of 15 to 30 minutes before the ferry departure time to make sure that you know where the ferry is going to arrive, you're in the right queue, and once the passengers have come off the ferry and the vehicles, if it's a vehicle ferry, you're in the right place to get on board. Now, one thing I do recommend, and this is something that if you use Ferry Hopper and you install their app, you can do on the app, is actually track the progress of the ferry. So if you don't have the Ferry Hopper app, you can use a website called Marine Traffic, and if you put the name of the ferry into the search, it will actually show you on a map in near real time where the ferry actually is. So that's come in really handy for us because ferries sometimes run a little bit late. Generally, they're relatively punctual, I think, usually within sort of 15 to 30 minutes of the advertised departure time, they'll turn up. But if they are running slightly more late, or you just want to keep in the shade, maybe sit in a nearby taverna, have a drink, be comfortable before the ferry arrives, then using either the app or this website can really be helpful in kind of tracking where the ferry is. And then as it arrives into the port, you can just kind of get up, grab your bags, get to the right spot, and then get on board the ferry. Most ports have like gate areas where you're sort of expected to wait, but you don't have to. It's not like at an airport where you've got the security gate before you board the plane and you have to be there and then they close it before departure. You can literally be anywhere in the vicinity of the port, and then as you see the boat arriving, again, it'll take a couple of minutes for departing passengers to get off the ferry, and then all you have to do is join the crowd of people getting on board. It is a little bit of a free-for-all, but as long as you know that you're in the right place and you can get on the ferry before it leaves, then you're sorted. Put your bags in the hold. Depending on the size of the ship, you might find there are different baggage areas for different islands, because the ferries will often, travel between many islands on their route. So it's handy to make sure you put your bag in the area for the island you're going to. But smaller ferries, generally there's just one space to put your baggage. And then any small items, rucksacks, handbags, whatever, keep with you. And then you'll scan your QR code or your printed ticket as you then head upstairs to the main kind of passenger area. And that's pretty much it. Larger ferries tend not to have allocated seating. If you're traveling on one of the big slow ferries that take cars and lorries, you can pretty much sit wherever you want. The smaller or high-speed ferries, you will have an allocated seat number. And in high season, it is recommended to sit in your allocated space. If the ferry's not full, you can kind of sit wherever you want. But again, you might get comfortable in a seat and then it stops off at another island, more passengers get on, and you might find that you're in someone's seat. So generally, it's best to sit in the seat that you've been allocated. Now, if you are traveling to or from the mainland, it's probably worth understanding the sort of difference between the big ports on the mainland like Piraeus and Rafina versus the ports you'll typically be using on the islands, because Piraeus is absolutely huge. I think it's one of the busiest ports in Europe. So when it comes to getting on a ferry at Piraeus, then you need to look at the gate number that your ferry is departing from. It'll either be printed on the ticket, or usually you can go online to the ferry company's website, find out what gate their ferries depart from, and on Google Maps, if you zoom into Piraeus port, it will actually show you the different gates. For example, I think a lot of SeaJet's ferries that go to the popular islands like Mykonos, Paros, usually go from gate E9, which is on the sort of southeastern side of Piraeus. But it can take quite a while to walk around the port, so if you do find that you've got to the wrong gate, depending on how much time you've allowed, then you might struggle to get to the right place before the ferry departs. So it's pretty important, if you're going from the mainland, to have a clear understanding of what gate your ferry is going to depart from, and make sure you get to the right gate in plenty of time. If you are traveling by taxi, for example, then the taxis will know. You can probably say which ferry company you're using, and they should have a fairly good idea of where you need to be. By contrast, most Greek island ports are either sort of small or even smaller, and it's usually they'll just take one ferry at a time. Some of them can handle like 2 ferries at once, which can cause some confusion as well, particularly as some companies like SeaJet's have multiple ferries that look very similar. So if you do find yourself in a situation where there's 2 ferries docked at once and they look kind of identical, then make sure you do get on the right ferry. The ferries usually have their name printed on them, and that name should be on the ticket. But if you aren't sure, then either ask the people around you, make sure that you're heading in the same destination as they are, or there'll always be port police around the port when there are ferries arriving and departing. You should be able to ask them if you're not sure. And if all else fails, the staff from the ferry will come off the ferry as they're sort of helping people on and vehicles on and off. So the last sort of port of call, as it were, would be to ask the staff, show them your ticket if you need to, and just say, like, is this the right ferry? And hopefully with all of that, you will end up going to the right place. So in terms of some tips and general advice, one thing you will find, particularly these days, is that Greek ferries are not anywhere near as cheap as they used to be. And companies, particularly SeaJet's, which operate a lot of high-speed ferries, the ticket prices have just gone up massively in the past few years. I think sort of 4 or 5 years ago, you could get a high-speed ferry ticket for 30 to 40 euros between most sort of fairly close islands, whereas these days it's not unusual for a single ticket to cost 60, 70, even 80 euros. So it can add up quickly, particularly if you're island hopping. And one way to save a significant amount of money is to plan your itinerary around using non-high-speed ferries. And the easiest way you can tell them apart is actually by their price. So if you use a website like Ferry Hopper, to do your search. You'll probably get multiple results, particularly if you're traveling between popular islands, and you'll look at the prices, and most Greek ferry companies tend to, I think, price match with each other. So what you'll find is a lot of the high-speed ferries will be at a certain price, and then any conventional slower ferries will be at a different price, which can often be half price or even less than the cost of a high-speed ticket. And it will also tell you the journey time as well, and obviously a high-speed ferry you would hope is going to get you to the destination quicker than the conventional ferry. But there isn't always that much difference between them, because it will also depend on the route. Sometimes high-speed ferries will take a different route to visit more islands, whereas a slower conventional ferry might take a more direct route. So in some cases there can be as little as an hour difference between them. The experience, I think, on a conventional ferry is actually much nicer than a high-speed ferry. They're basically like budget cruise ships, if you like. Obviously there's no swimming pools or slides or anything, but you can sit outside, there are tables you can just kind of relax at, you can walk around the ship. They're usually much more stable if it's windy or wavy, and it's just an all-round nicer experience. I actually think it's kind of an enjoyable part, particularly of island hopping, is, you know, to get on the ferry, sit outside with some food and drink, watch the other islands as you're going by, and then if you're not getting off at the next stop, as the ship docks, you can kind of see the island that you're not actually stopping at, and then, you know, maybe you'll like the look of it and want to include it in a subsequent trip. So I definitely recommend, for financial reasons and for sort of comfort, to try and avoid the high-speed ferries if you can. It's not always possible. Some popular routes, for example, I think Santorini to Milos, there may only be one conventional ferry a week, whereas the high-speed ferries more often than not run daily. So unless you've got the flexibility to plan your itinerary around the conventional ferries, you're probably going to end up using a high-speed ferry at some point. But just be aware that they are quite expensive, and if it's a small high-speed ferry such as Seajet's Superjet, they can be quite unpleasant in wavy conditions. So if you don't travel well, I would highly recommend at least giving some consideration to planning your itinerary around the availability of the slower conventional ferries. Another tip as well is actually the time of day that you travel. So if you are island hopping, this is more of an issue probably than if you're just using a ferry once to get to an island and then back again at the end of your trip. But with island hopping, because you're traveling multiple times between different islands, it can really make a difference if you plan to use a ferry in the middle of the day, because you'll have to check out of your hotel usually between 10 a.m. and midday, and most hotels don't allow you to check in again until at least 2 p.m. So you'll have this window over lunchtime where you're not going to have any accommodation, so you're going to have all of your luggage with you, and that is the perfect time to be traveling. So if you can find a ferry ticket for sort of late morning, early afternoon, then by the time you've got yourself to the port, you know, had a drink and some food, got on board the ferry, arrived at your destination, it's probably going to be time to check into your next hotel. So it's a bit of an optimization, and you can't always do that depending on the ferry schedules, but it's, in some cases, I would say it's worth paying a small premium if you can actually get a ferry crossing that is in the middle of the day, because it's just a lot more convenient. Some ferries do go very early in the morning, and some ferries do arrive very late at night, and you may be able to save money by using those ferries, but you've got to weigh that up against, you know, getting up early or arriving at your destination incredibly late, and just the impact that that's going to have overall on your vacation. So that's it for today's video. If you do have any further questions, please feel free to put a comment down below, and we'll do our best to answer them. You can also find a lot more information on our website, greecetravelguide.co.uk, including our Greek Ferry Travel Guide, which covers a lot of the same information as we've just described in this video. But yeah, I highly recommend trying Greek Ferry Travel. It opens up a load of new islands that you can't get to by plane. And those are generally, in my experience, much nicer, more authentic Greek islands, and they have far fewer tourists because there are lots of people that just won't go to a Greek island unless you can fly there. So if you're prepared to put in that little bit of extra effort and arrive by ferry, then the reward is you'll get a much nicer and more authentic Greek island experience. So again, that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and look forward to seeing you in the next one.